If your dog keeps crossing boundaries, not listening, clinging, or getting distressed, it is very easy to assume the answer is better training. And sometimes training does help, right? But sometimes the pattern keeps repeating because the issue is not only behavioral. Sometimes your animal is responding to something deeper in the bond between you. And that is what I want to talk about today. So, hi, I'm Fabienne, and I work at the intersection of therapy, energy healing, and the human animal bond. In my work, I often see that what looks like a behavior problem on the surface can sometimes be connected to something emotional and relational underneath it. So, in this video, I want to show you what I mean by that, why this matters, and how your animal's behavior may be reflecting something that has not yet been fully seen. Let's start with a common situation. You ask your dog to wait. You say clearly, you repeat yourself, and still they move forward, ignore the cue, or push past the limit you were trying to hold. And in that moment, the conclusion feels obvious. I need to be clearer, more consistent, and better with boundaries. So you try harder, you refine your timing, you adjust your tone, you become more precise, yet the same pattern returns. And this is often the moment when people start searching for better techniques, more structure, or better ways of getting the behavior under control. And again, sometimes this is useful, absolutely, but sometimes it does not really settle the pattern because what is happening is not only about what you're doing on the surface. There may be something else shaping the interaction. A lot of people naturally interpret their animal's behavior in practical terms. The dog that does not listen becomes a consistency issue. The dog that pushes limits becomes a boundary issue. And the animal that seems unsettled becomes a structure issue. And these interpretations are often thoughtful and partly true, but they usually describe what is visible. They do not always explain what is shaping the pattern. And I understand why we focus there. What we can see is easier to work with. It gives us direction and it gives us a sense of control, right? But it can also pull attention away from the deeper layer that is asking to be noticed. I once worked with a woman who came into session with a very clear story about what was happening with her dog. She described her dog as strong-willed and persistent. He often ignored cues and moved past the limits she tried to set. And over time, she had come to the conclusion that this was about boundaries. She felt she needed to be firmer, more consistent, and more decisive. And honestly, it made sense, right? Her observations were accurate. But as she spoke, there was something in the way she described the dynamic that just suggested there might be more underneath it. So we slowed it down together in session. We looked not only at what the dog was doing, but at what was happening inside of her in those moments. And the different picture began to emerge. It became clear that where there was a place that there was a place inside of her that did not feel entirely safe being loved. She would not have named it that way herself. It was much more subtle than that. It showed up in moments where connection felt at risk, in the situation just before saying no, in the pull to keep things open rather than risk disrupting closeness. And as we stayed with it longer, it connected back to earlier experiences, to a time where love had not felt steady, where closeness was not fully predictable, and where being loved came with uncertainty. And from that place, holding a boundary was never just about knowing what to say. It asked for a level of internal safety that was not fully there yet. Saying no touched something much deeper for her. It touched belonging, and it touched the fear of losing connection. And once that came into view, her dog's behavior started to make sense differently. The repeated crossing of limits was no longer just something to correct. It was also reflecting a place within her where steadiness and safety were not fully established yet. And this kind of dynamic comes up more often than people think. Animals tend to meet us in ways that are accessible. They show something through behavior that we can recognize, and that gives us an entry point. But what they are responding to often reaches further than what is immediately visible. So, for example, a dog that becomes distressed when left alone is often understood as having separation anxiety. And yes, behaviorally, that may be true, but sometimes there is also a deeper layer. And that layer is important. The person may carry their own history around separation. Maybe connection did not feel consistent. Maybe closeness could not always be relied on. And I'm talking about early childhood experiences and family of origin. And that can create a subtle tension around leaving and being left, even if the person is not consciously thinking about it. And then the dog is responding not only to the absence itself, but also to the emotional quality around it. Another example is a dog that constantly seeks attention or stays very close. And again, sometimes that framing fits, but sometimes it also reflects something relational in the human, a place where closeness and reassurance feel deeply necessary, a place where being alone does not feel fully safe. So, in all of these cases, the behavior is real, it matters, it deserves support. But behavior alone does not always explain why the same pattern keeps repeating. Because the animal may be responding not only to what is being done, but also to what is being felt and lived underneath it. And then you start looking beneath the surface. The process changes in a very practical way. In my client's case, the shift did not come from trying harder. It came from addressing the deeper beliefs and emotional experiences that were shaping how she showed up. As she began to work with the childhood experiences where love had not felt safe or steady, her internal reality started to shift. And the part of her that had learned to hold on, adapt, please, and avoid risking connection, um, and avoid risking connection, sorry, it began to soften, that part began to soften, and her nervous system carried less anxiety, and the fear around saying no or holding a boundary was no longer active in the same way. So her boundaries became clearer and more consistent, not because she forced them, not because she did more training, but more because there was less internal resistance around them. And of course, her dog responded to that shift because her internal experience changed. The interaction changed too. And this is the kind of work we do in root cause therapy. It helps bring old material into awareness so it can be felt, processed, and released rather than managed only from the surface. So, if you have been working the same pattern with your animal for a long time and it still is not really changing, it may be worth widening the lens. Look at the behavior, yes, absolutely. Take in the practical information it gives you, but also ask, what is happening in me when this pattern shows up? What do I feel in those moments? And what becomes activated in the bond? Because sometimes your animal is not only showing you a behavior issue, sometimes they're showing you a deeper emotional truth that is ready to be seen. And that is often where lasting change begins. And if you would like support exploring that, exploring what your animal may be reflecting, and working with it in a way that is grounded and practical, you're welcome to work with me. I currently offer sessions where we look at both the surface pattern and what lies underneath it. And if you want an easy first step, I also have a free emotional mirror checklist, which help you explore some of the beliefs and emotional patterns that may be shaping the bond with your animal. I'll place the link in the description. And if this video resonated, let me know in the comments. Please, I'm curious. Has your animal ever shown you something about yourself that you only understood later? Thanks for being here.